Rick has never had an easy life. From a very young age, he had to face an abusive home, where words of love were rare and screams were frequent. His refuge, as a child, was on the streets and later in drugs. Addiction took over his life for years, distancing him from the few people who still tried to care about him. When he finally broke free from addiction, he no longer recognized the people around him, nor did he know how to rebuild the bonds that had been broken. The pizza he made at the pizzeria where he worked was the only thing that still made sense. Rick didn't care about the past. He was at peace with the idea of moving forward alone, without expectations, just living. One night, as he was driving home to a poor neighborhood, Rick came across something that made him slow down. A young woman he didn't know was standing on the side of the road, desperately trying to change a flat tire. At first, Rick was hesitant. He didn't want to get involved. His life was too small to take on other people's problems, or so he thought. But as he watched her struggle without success, he found himself getting out of the car and walking toward her, not knowing exactly what was making him do this. "Do you need help?" he asked, not quite believing the answer. She looked up, a little surprised, but accepted without hesitation. He would help, but he didn't expect it to change anything. But as he was changing the tire, something inside him began to stir. They talked for a few minutes. Rick talked about his past, something he rarely shared, and the young woman, named Sarah, listened intently, without judgment. That night, a simple act of kindness made Rick feel more human than he had in years. The next day, Rick was still trying to understand what had happened that night. He got up, made his coffee, and went about his usual routine, as if nothing had changed. But a part of him, something small but noticeable, couldn't get Sarah out of his head. What did she represent, after all? A person who cared about someone like him? Or was it just a passing gesture, a small kindness that would soon be lost in time? He was so used to dealing with people who gave nothing in return that, even without wanting to, he prepared himself for the worst. His life had always been like this, but what he didn't know was that that night, that small help would have consequences that would change his trajectory forever. It was then, in the middle of the afternoon, that Rick heard the doorbell ring. He opened the door without much expectation, but when he saw a black SUV parked on his street, his heart skipped a beat. 3 people got out of the car. The man leading the group, a tall, firm-looking man, approached and held out his hand. "Rick, my name is Gerald," he said. "This is my sister Sarah and our friends. She's talked a lot about you." Rick was surprised, not knowing what to say. Sarah smiled shyly, but she didn't seem awkward or uncomfortable. Gerald, sensing Rick's hesitation, continued, "Sarah was very touched by what you did for her. Kindness from someone like that is rare, and she didn't want to miss out on thanking you in the right way." Rick tried to hide his discomfort, but his body felt something different, a new sensation, a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Little did he know that this simple gesture of help would be the key to a transformation he had never imagined possible. Gerald wasted no time in explaining the reason for his visit. He spoke of his sister's gratitude, but also of a gift she had prepared. "Sarah insisted that I come here and deliver this in person," he said, taking an envelope out of the car. Rick looked at the envelope and then at Gerald's face, unsure of what to think. What could this be? Something he didn't deserve. But Gerald, with a calm smile, continued, "She wanted you to know that her help wasn't just a kindness. She and our family believe that you deserve something more, something better." Rick looked at Sarah, who was still silent, watching him with a look of respect. He felt a lightness in his chest, something hard to describe, as if the burden he had been carrying for so long was, for a moment, lighter. When Rick opened the envelope, he found a letter that began with simple words that had a profound impact on him. "Rick, we want to give you a chance. Not only to thank you for what you did for Sarah, but because we believe you have the potential to do more than you think. Our gift to you is a job opportunity at Golden Leaf. We know this could be the chance to change your life." The words kept spinning in his head, and he felt as if the ground had fallen out from under him. An opportunity at Golden Leaf. It was a chance to work for a company he had only heard about, but that seemed like a distant dream. He, Rick, who had been through so much that he could barely make it through his current job, now had the chance to start over. At first, he couldn't believe it. He looked for some sign that this was real. And when he saw Gerald and Sarah's faces, so serious and genuine, Rick knew he was being led by something bigger than himself. Rick accepted the proposal with the same hesitation that had been taking hold of him since the visit. He wasn't sure what to do with all of this, but the opportunity was something he couldn't ignore. Time had passed quickly since that day, and soon he found himself in a modern office, surrounded by people who seemed to have come from a completely different world than his own. However, Gerald and Sarah were there, and their presence made everything easier. Rick wasn't alone. He began to work with dedication, focusing every bit of his effort on this new beginning. In a short time, he had proven his worth, and the company began to see the potential that he himself had taken so long to recognize in himself. The simple life he had built at the pizzeria seemed like a distant memory, but for some reason it was still there, giving him strength. He knew he couldn't let it all slip away. As Rick immersed himself in this new world, he felt a great inner transformation. He changed his lifestyle, began to take better care of himself, and his confidence was slowly rebuilt. His relationship with Mr. Freeman, the friend who had always supported him during his recovery from addiction, also strengthened. Rick made a point of bringing Freeman to live with him in his new home, in a quiet and safe neighborhood, something he never imagined he would have. The change was not just physical. The person he had been before seemed to be slowly giving way to someone more secure, more open, more capable of loving and being loved. His relationship with Sarah and Gerald grew closer. They treated him like part of the family, something Rick never imagined could happen. The kindness of one person, however small, had triggered a change that to him seemed too good to be true, but somehow it was. He felt renewed, and more than ever, he understood that life did indeed have the capacity to transform. Rick looked out the window of his new home, feeling a peace that seemed strange, but deeply comforting. He never imagined he would come this far, or that a simple act of kindness could change his trajectory so drastically. The man he had been marked by abuse and addiction was beginning to fade away. In his place was someone who, even with his scars, now knew what it was like to have a future. Rick knew the fight would never be completely easy, and that the road ahead would still bring challenges. But in that moment, he felt like life had finally given him something worth living for. What he could not have foreseen was that by helping Sarah that day, he was not just doing a kind act. He was accepting the possibility of being a different person, and perhaps finally believing that he deserved the chances life was giving him. The transformation was happening, and he knew it came from within.